Good day, YouTube. Just a quick word of caution for you. This week I talk about some material that might stir up some stuff for you, some thoughts or feelings that are uncomfortable. If that's the case, I do have a playlist for you, mental health essentials, that might help with some basic understanding and navigating those uncomfortable feelings. But I truly believe that there's no content you're going to find on YouTube that's a substitute for actually working with someone in your area that you can get to know, that can get to know you, that can help you navigate those stresses. I think you deserve that support. I hope that you will seek it out. In the meantime, let's check out this week's content. Good day, YouTube. I'm Daniel Claremont. I'm the Acadian therapist. Welcome back to lovely rural Nova Scotia. I hope that you're doing well. The vast majority of people who contact me looking for mental health assistance is because they have been struggling to accomplish something in their life. In fact, that's what this whole playlist is about, making changes in your life. But there's always some folks that are contacting me because someone they care about is struggling, they're stuck, they're not moving forward, and they're frustrated with how to help this loved one accomplish this, or how to improve the marriage, how to improve family relationships. So that's what we're talking about this week. How to navigate that frustration when someone you care about is stuck. And maybe how to help them move forward a little bit. As always, if you find value in this content, please feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe. All these things help support my work here. Let's get started. A basic starting point in therapy is to start with the person that's actually in the room. That would be you, dear viewer. When you think about this problem, when you think about this relationship, when you think about the challenge that's got you watching this far, what's it bringing up in you? Almost certainly you're uncomfortable, you're stressed, you might be anxious or frustrated. Well, those emotions, those are part of your survival emotions, right? So they're going to make it seem more urgent, more of an emergency, more of a crisis than maybe it actually is. So you want to recognize those emotions and maybe do some grounding strategies, take a few breaths, take some time and reflect. What's this bringing up in me and why? It may also bring up stories. So you might think back on, why does this always fall on me? Why does everything fall on me? Why am I always having to deal with these situations? These are fair questions. In fact, sometimes people who are more helpers, healers, counselors, nurses, people in nurturing kind of professions have done it for a long time. And they might even remember being kids and being taught either directly or indirectly, just at some point it just became normal that you're the fixer, you're the helper. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And in fact, a lot of really wonderful healers and helpers have that kind of a history and there's no problem to it. But you want to be aware of it. The reason why is if you are helping because it's your duty or it's your job or you're good at it and people rely on you, well, you can be proud of that. But if you're not careful, eventually you can feel resentful. You can feel annoyed or hurt or angry when people reject your suggestions, or it can feel like a slog sometimes when you're helping people. So that resentment comes from the feeling that you didn't have a choice and it's unfair that it always has to fall onto you. This doesn't mean you have to radically give that up. So once you work through this, if you recognize you've got some of those early influences, this would be a great thing to bring to a therapist or to do some kind of healing work, whatever that means for you. Journaling, shaman, whatever works for you. But connecting with someone, working through some of those underlying issues, and maybe healing some of that old pain. The benefit of that is you're still going to be you. Chances are you're still going to be a helper, you're still going to give, but because it is a gift, there's less resentment, there's less intensity, and the way you communicate when you see that someone needs change is more collaborative. You're more on the same page. You are genuinely giving your energy, and when the other person rejects it, as people will, you won't take it so personally. It won't hurt so much. So that's my plug for doing your own work on that. By the way, this also speaks to the risk of compassion fatigue, secondary stress, burnout, that a lot of people in helping professions are vulnerable to. So again, if you do this work, it helps to avoid or reduce or recover from those kinds of concerns. And last but not least, this kind of a self-reflection is also role modeling. You're actually showing to the other person, this is me doing my own work. This is what doing your own work looks like. And do you see the benefits? And I am actually happier and healthier. So you're kind of showing them that, basically you're destigmatizing. You're showing them that there's nothing to fear and that they can do this work and change is possible. Now, when you do this reflection as to what's bothering you and why, what is it bringing up for you, this might bring up questions of values, things, basic ideas of how it feels normal and natural to communicate that are very normal and natural for you, but maybe not for others. A really common example I find in this tends to be almost a gender split, especially for older generations. Men and women were socialized somewhat differently, at least in my part of the world. The idea of expressing emotion, well, recognizing that you have emotions and actually expressing them, talking them through, is a foreign concept for some people. And so if you were raised with the idea that it's okay to have emotions and talk about them, if you have a partner that doesn't, it might feel like they're closed off or they don't care about you or they're not invested in the relationship. You might feel lonely in that relationship because they don't open up to you, so you don't know what's going on in there. And because you were raised that way, it feels normal to you. Similarly, if you're not raised talking, it can feel tiring, it can feel exhausting, that some people are just, let's say you're more introverted and you have somebody that's more extroverted. So they're always talking, they're always chatting, there's always every thought that comes through their head needs to come out of their mouth. Well, you might just feel exhausted and they just need to learn to keep those things to themselves and sort it out on their own. These are basic assumptions that feel natural to you because, well, you're used to being you and you're used to viewing the world your way. But that doesn't mean that other people are going to. In fact, most of the time they're not exactly. And so that's where that error of translation comes up. When you notice that you have an assumption or a belief, this is why I like Brené Brown's "the story I'm making up" strategy. So the way you might apply it would be, when I ask you about your day and you go, the story that I'm making up is, you don't care about me, or you don't want me in your life, really. Right? So when you actually say that out loud, and I get it, it's a little bit artificial, it feels a little bit forced, but let's be honest, any new intervention you try is going to feel a little awkward, right? So, if you're willing to give that a try, you're basically helping to translate your inner world to them so that they can connect with you. And you're also showing them how to translate for you. So instead of wondering what's going on in their head, you can say, I'm curious what's going on in your head. And this is a strategy that works for me to help translate for you. Can you translate for me? I want to understand. And there's that curiosity. Now, because often the resistance that you're seeing is because that person is feeling defensive. They're feeling attacked. Maybe they have been attacked. Maybe you've butted heads about it before. It's really hard for them to look at this change and to make it without feeling like they're losing some dignity. And so this is where you might extend them a little bit of credit. So you might ask them what they think you could improve on or change. Now, remember those grounding strategies, it might be hard for you to hear. But if you're able to take in what they say, what they suggest, And if it's practical, if it's safe, if it's not an unfair demand, demonstrate some willingness to apply their feedback to change your life, to do your part to improve the relationship. And then that gives you a little bit of credit so that when you ask them later, instead of them feeling like they have to do all the work and they're failing, well, no, it's that you're both in relationship, you want to improve things together, and you're both equal partners to help make things go better. Now, because your emotions are stirred up about this is a crisis. It's almost certain that it seems really big to you. Now, because you did your grounding, you took those breaths, it's reduced the intensity, but you might want to ask yourself, how urgent is this really? Is this immediately life-threatening? Is it really that urgent? If it is, well, that's where you might have to take matters into your own hands. That's where you might have to call the authorities. That's where you might have to do something life-saving to help that person, whether that's taking them to the hospital, whether that's contacting a psychiatrist, whatever the resources are in your area. If there's something that is a survival threat, you might have to take that action unilaterally. You have to take that action yourself, and they may object to it, and they may hate you, but they're still going to be alive to hate you, and they're going to have time to work through it. Suicide intervention can be like that. So if someone is at risk of dying imminently, well, you need to do what you have to do to help save their life. And so that's just very understandable. But most situations are not going to be that urgent. And so that's where you might think in terms of harm reduction strategies. We talked about that before. But think about the change that needs to be done. Think about the time that you have. And maybe if you can break it down to small enough pieces, using maybe a tiny habits approach, then it makes it easier to change. It takes the pressure off you, it takes the pressure off of them. So there is time to resolve this. Make use of it. Of course, depending on how long this has been going on, we get a little bit numb or defeated or jaded about it. And so you see this sometimes with couples that have been together for decades. They just say that's how they are. And they just don't talk, they can't understand it. Be cautious of that kind of a conclusion. That's usually the kind of thing we tell ourselves when we're trying to convince ourselves of something. We're trying to protect ourselves from further disappointment, further pain, and so we're just ready to rule them out. We're ready to write them off and say, whatever, that's just how they are, I give up. Recognize that those are symptoms that you're experiencing. They're not necessarily rational conclusions. There are so many ways that we can approach situations. I've talked about a few options here. There are several more. And of course, to actually meet with somebody like a therapist or something in your area, to actually explore even more resources that are specifically applied to your relationship, your situation, is going to help you find maybe that hope that you're looking for. When your mind says there's no point or they can't, maybe check that assumption. Make sure you're not just trying to protect yourself from further disappointment, and try not to give up on the hope. People change every day about a wide range of issues. Why can't that be you and your relationship? So I hope that those thoughts are a little bit helpful for you. As always, if you have any thoughts, comments, I'd love to hear them. In the meantime, take care, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.